Hello to the nation, and welcome to an extra special edition of One Nation Under Whiskey with an extra special surprise host, myself, Steve Hawley. And I am here with the J team, Jessica, Rabbit Guillermo Lomas, Jason, Neil Patrick Harris, Johnson Yellen, and Joshua Squirrelgate Hatton.
Squirrelgate. Yep, that's right.
Thank you for the annotations so that I get everything exactly right. But excited to be here and flip the tables a bit and grill you all about One Nation Under Whiskey, past, present, and future. So if you three are all warmed up, let's just jump into it, because right before we started, Mr. Johnson Yellen said, I don't think we need 45 minutes, which was music to my ears. We'll see if he can live up to his own predictions. So, with that, how about a quick hello from each other?
Hello.
For some reason, we're falling down wells.
It's so weird having the tables turned. Like, I don't know. I'm so used to introducing. I'm definitely not used to you introducing. So you're both a surprise host, but I think we're surprised guests.
Yes, you are surprised guests. You're lucky I'm not shining a giant spotlight in your eyes. But why don't we jump into it? Yeah, we're talking about One Nation Under Whiskey, past, present, and future. So let's start where we should start, with the past. Interesting journey that you all have been, starting as whiskey writers, whiskey bloggers, transitioning into whiskey makers and independent bottlers, and then along the way, investigative journalists in the world of whiskey as well through the One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. So, can you just give me a little bit of history here about why podcasting came, into your world, and why you said, yes, let's do that?
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about the podcast origin story is that Jason and I were having our standard weekly meeting, or whatever the meeting was. We had our standard meeting, and we both came to it saying, boy, do I have an idea. It's like, oh, okay, well, what's your idea? No, you go first. And we each came with the same idea. We should start a podcast. And that was what? That was 2017. So it wasn't even like, crap, we're stuck in COVID. What do we do with our time?
When everybody started a podcast.
Right. We had a podcast before everybody and their uncle had podcasts.
So you're OGs is what you're saying. Yeah.
I still credit to Mr. Mark Gillespie. We still indeed call him the OG of this situation, this setting. Not going to steal any of that man's thunder. He really set the groundwork with Whiskey Cast, but in terms of industry, from within the industry, yes, that was, I'm sure somebody in the industry could tell us that we're full of shit on this point, but I think we're one of the first industry groups to come out with a podcast. Is that your recollection, Joshua?
That's my recollection, because I think that was our aim from the get-go. We definitely had the Whiskey Cast conversation, and
for sure,
if we do our own podcast, what do we do? The last thing we wanted to do was step on Mark's toes or swim in his waters that he's already, like, he owns that space and he does a great job with his podcast. And so we wanted to have something that was a bit different, and something that, and we've used this term over the years, right, gives people a peek behind the industry curtain. And that was the aim of it,
So it wasn't what I imagined, which was you guys sitting in a room opining and waxing lyrical on whiskey, and then saying, God damn, somebody should be recording this. It's so good.
Not in the slightest. It was always from day one, is anyone going to listen to this? Like, we had fun chatting with industry friends. One of the first things we started to hear from the nation and from listeners of the podcast around the world was I love being a fly on the wall at these conversations. And I didn't think that was any great skill set on my part or Joshua's part. That was just, we were sitting down with industry friends and recording a portion of it. And it really resonated. And once we got to hear from listeners around the world, it was a bit more like, oh crap, people are listening to this. Oh crap.
We better do it well.
100%. And then that's what we started to build on. And not to get ahead of ourselves, but that's kind of where we're looking at this evolution into season 9. But I'm going to put a pin in that. Jess, Rabbit Guillermo Lomas had a sentence worth uttering, please.
I was only going to say that I think this is I've actually never heard you two say that about the podcast before. I always tell the creation story of Single Cast Nation as a plot line for a Hallmark movie, where you two have the meet cute moment over Thanksgiving and the very romantic phone call that you two had where you decided to set up being independent bottlers. I'm excited to hear that this is exactly how the podcast was created, and this can be the Hallmark movie part 2, where we all sit down and discuss you two being all cute and be like, we should do a podcast. And you're both going, yes. And then I think there's a high five. And then we transition into scenes of you with microphones walking around talking to people. Yeah. I definitely remember you coming to me and telling me that when you were going to do the podcast recording at the Jubilee, I think the first time that I was on the podcast was the first Seattle Jubilee, I think. And I was terrified because it was noisy and busy, and Joshua came on and shoved a microphone in my face. And then he told me very excitedly, oh, the bit where we interviewed you is in the podcast. So I went and listened to it and I was like, I'm not. But it turns out that when I'm in Seattle, I developed this incredible American accent. I actually didn't recognize myself in the podcast. You had to give me the time code. And I was like, is that what I sound like? So
that could be helpful.
Did you say y'all in your interview?
Nearly. I fully anticipate by the end of this podcast recording with you three, I will have redeveloped my transatlantic Josh Stone trashy Seattle accent. So that'll be fun for me to listen back to in the car as I shout at myself. Thanks.
Well, that could be helpful in the future when you're on trial for something and someone says, "Is this Jessica Lomas?" You say, "No." Everybody in the jury says that doesn't sound like what we're hearing at all.
Never heard of her.
I want to build onto your meet cute for the creation of the podcast. And I want to tell you the true story that Joshua glossed over, which is Joshua said, I think we should create. And I said, a podcast. And then we both said, yeah, and raised our arms in the air. That's the true meet cute.
That is true.
For that moment, Jess.
I remember we raised our arms in the air and we simply waved them around like as if we just didn't care. It was a sight.
And as two white men in your 40s, you were absolutely qualified for this, and so no one else was 100%. Doing it. And you were like, "Hey, we should do this," and here we are. All these seasons 100%. Later, still absolutely smashing it to the man.
That was this. And as of yet,
so let me ask you this.
There's no others. There's no competition.
Let me ask you this. Let's pretend Single Cast Nation, gasp, never existed.
You shut your mouth when you're talking to me. You boys kept doing your writing. Do you think One Nation Under Whiskey would still have been born? And as it stands today, do you think that Single Cast Nation and One Nation Under Whiskey are inextricably tied? Could one exist without the other?
That's a terrific question. If I may take a stab at this first.
Stab away.
I think it could definitely still exist, which was for listeners who occasionally reach out about it. That is certainly what Extra was an attempt at, which was, what if we took Single Cast Nation completely out of this equation and just talked about the industry news that we talk about all the time? Josh and I talk about, Jess and we talk about, Swede Scott chimes in on, Steve, we're talking to Steve about corners of the industry. So I think there could have been a natural move in that direction. At that point, though, it would have felt a lot more like Mark Gillespie's remit. Then you are talking about kind of a whiskey cast format. And as Josh rightly says, there was never any intention to step on Mark's toes, to get into, the waters Mark was swimming in. So it may have taken us longer to get back around to that, or maybe a willingness to find another point of entry. As Jess rightly says, we were already two white guys with access to the internet when we were writing. We didn't just have to be two white guys with access to podcasting equipment. So the hope would have been to say something interesting for once. So that's my stab at it.
Yeah, and I think if we had never set out to start Single Cast Nation, well, let me say it this way. The reason we set out to start Single Cast Nation, the reason I reached out to Jason, was because we had gotten on so well. It was, we had similar whiskey palates. We, I think we're both really inquisitive, wanted to know more. We had this friendship that was budding, and I think we would have come to each other at some point and said, I see podcasts are doing a thing. Maybe we, evolve from blogs to podcasts. So I definitely think that this could have lived as a standalone. And I think, I think it could have.
Yes, that was a very Hallmark story, wasn't it?
Oh, it was really cute. I was also thinking, maybe if you hadn't got to podcasting, maybe you would have become TikTokers or like YouTube stars. Or I like the idea that there is an inevitability about you two doing a whiskey or a drinks-based project together. And if podcasting hadn't become the thing, what other form of a medium? Because I do feel like, the time at which you guys were writing blogs, I used to read a lot of blogs, especially drinks blogs, beer and whiskey blogs, a lot. And it kind of faded away. And I was thinking, where did those content creators go? Where can I find them now? There are a few people who I still do follow who have switched, obviously, from blogs, although they do exist. They tend to have like Substack emails and roundups that come out. But otherwise, people have transitioned, I think, into the inevitable forms of extremely short attention span social media like Instagram and TikTok.
And the rise of Patreon, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I, for one, am grateful that this went down the audio path. It certainly fits my life really well, and I get to listen to them on walks in the car. But also, I feel like if we went to a visual medium, Jason would almost be forced to have maintained the Gandalf appearance, for the sensationalist,
right?
To really grab the eyeball. So I think the world is better off that this remains an audio.
My wife is 100 times happier, maybe 1,000 times happier. Who can measure that much happiness that Dramgolf got laid to rest?
I have been telling people that no one's going to recognize you when they see the independent filmmakers, independent bottlers film, because you two both have your, at the time of filming, COVID disguises on. So people could be like, you two look familiar, but I can't place you. What are you from? So maybe.
You don't think people are going to recognize Joshua?
Well, yeah, because I've got longish hair then. Jason, I think so long as you bring some sort of a wizard staff with you to this event, I think they'll recognize you. And just start screaming like "fool of a took," and you shall not pass, and just insert Gandalf quotes here. You'll be fine.
Stand at the doorway. Hopefully, we have a table near the doorway. I can tell people they're not passing into the vestibule.
So let's talk about how you all actually pull off this podcast. And one question I have for you is, going into a season, do you have a thematic arc to the season in mind, or is it more ad hoc? You kind of take it as it comes, or is it some level of both? I suppose because the world changes throughout a season.
Yeah, it's early on. We didn't necessarily have themes that we were looking to explore. Early days, it was good enough to just find the people to talk to and just
who will even talk to us?
Who will even talk to us? Like we got David Stirk, right? That set us on the track. But anyway, it was to my mind. And yeah, Jason, go ahead.
There's a point that you've made early and often, which is spot on. That when we actually started, the plan was to talk to other independent bottlers.
That's true.
Exclusively.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And we knew that was a finite proposition.
Yeah.
But if you look at the early days, there's a lot of very front-loaded episodes with independent bottlers. And then it became what if we jump out to this brand, but then return to independent bottling?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we started this. But
oh man, no, thank you. I as soon as you bring it up, I remember that history.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Yeah, there you go. So okay, so the answer is yes. We did start off with themes, but I think it did get to the point. There are only so many independent bottlers, right? And then the fact of the matter is, you can set off saying we're going to create this thing, and this thing will be X. But as you evolve, it takes you down paths you don't necessarily expect, right? And so it became more about, let's just have whiskey industry conversations. Let's maybe take some detours. We've had, people like Matthew Reese from The Americans. And recently he was in the new Saturday Night movie. He played George Carlin, which he was fantastic.
Yeah, he was great in that.
He was awesome. Musicians like Bonnie Prince Billy and Adel Rafai as a comedian, and right, the list goes on. And then I want to say, of course, COVID happened. Let's not discuss that unless you want to. But I want to say it was maybe 2023, not necessarily 2024, but 2023, where Jason, you had said, I want to incorporate an agricultural arc to our conversations.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, I think when we started introducing the year-in preview with Susanna Skyver-Barton, and we were able to bring our very own Jess Lomas into those conversations, there were definitely things we were talking about at the absolute earliest point of the year that could inform the rest of the year. Yeah. And I think we got to a point where we had said, look, climate change can be politicized. We are not going to politicize it. We're going to talk to the people who are affected by it day in and day out. And we're going to discuss the various knock-on effects that come from that. And I remember us talking to David Thompson from Filey Bay, Spirit of Yorkshire, and him having an agricultural background. And we got on to talking about rye. And instead of just talking about rye as a flavor profile, we were talking about the depth of the roots. We were talking about nitrogen fixing. And I thought it added another spoke to how one talks about whiskey. Obviously, we had the Whiskey Sisters from Colorado. Mm-hmm. Am I remember that name correctly? Was it?
Yeah, Whiskey Sisters. Yeah.
And their supply, and they're both fantastic. And talking to them about their corn that got blown out by a storm, and they lost 160 acres of corn. Like, that's something that's worth returning to, even once you speak to a producer. That has deleterious knock-on effects, right? And you want to have those ongoing conversations. So that became very important to me, to bring that in. We talked water with other people as well, and water supply, which then affects Islay. When you hear a place like Islay having water shortages in the summer, that seems impossible, to quote our beloved Ralph Wiggum. And so there's so much more to whiskey than just whiskey in a bottle. And I thought if we were going to demonstrate some kind of connective tissue within this industry, it was meaningful to get into those conversations. And what was especially good was the listeners responded to that. That was very, very pleasing. So,
yeah.
Well, I think that the fact that the nation responds to that is a result of being able to relate to you all, because you're learning along the way and they're learning along with you, right?
100%.
So I think that creates a really cool dynamic, as opposed to you're just delivering news or delivering information or educating. You're kind of doing that along with the listener as well. So I think that's one of the things that's powerful about the podcast. But that kind of leads me to my next question, and we'll start with you, Jess. What have you all learned about how to do this well? Right? What does it take to be good at this?
That's an extremely kind,
you didn't know when you started.
Extremely kind leading question, because it makes it sound like we're all very good at this. I think it helps that to listen to the podcast or podcast. It's obvious that the two hosts know each other and have an ability to kind of play off each other. So when I first started being on the podcast, when I joined SCN, and even before I joined, I think it's fun because it feels like you're just having a nice conversation with some people. And once you've got into it and you've got over that first weird hurdle of there's a microphone in front of my face, once you've got past that, it's really easy to just have a conversation. And I think the episode Jason just mentioned there with David and the Spirit of Yorkshire, like listening to that was so interesting because it's an extremely nerdy topic, but it was being discussed very openly and very in a way that people who don't have that scientific and farming background can get involved in. And I think that when we talk, it's just having in your head who it is that you're talking to, who are the people that are getting involved in the conversation. And so one of the things that I have anyway within my life within the whiskey world is I'm extremely irritated by the concept of gatekeeping, knowledge, access into learning about whiskey. This kind of, as an industry, I think we do by and large a very good job of it, but there is a point where you can have a kind of snobby attitude of, well, I've been drinking whiskey since the 60s, let me tell you about. And I think collectively as a team, I think we work quite hard to not have that. I know I joke regularly about coming on the podcast just to brag about silly things that I've drunk, but it's also because I'm sharing it with an audience who appreciate what I'm saying. Like if I go home and tell my mum that I've had this stuff, I get the same blank look. She hasn't a clue, and she's desperately trying to appease me and say, "Oh, well, I'm really happy for you. That's great. Well done." But having a podcast outlet where I can share this nonsense, knowing that the reaction I sort of want for some of it is people to email and being like, "Oh my God, I'm so jealous. What an experience. I also want to have that." It's really lovely that I'm being a bit of a dick, but it's in a way that I'm doing it with an audience that makes a safe space. So thank you very much, Podcast listeners, for enabling me, and I will continue to blame you. And I think that's kind of the joy of doing this. And so I don't know if I think of it as I think of it as like an active skill, which I am bringing to this medium. I just hope that I also help convey the sense of like genuinely loving and having a passion for what I do in this industry, and that people who are listening are also really in love with the idea and the world and drinking and sharing of whiskey. And so I think it's a nice, this sounds really cheesy, like a really nice friendly space to be in. Which is obviously because these two set it up as a Hallmark movie, so I can only come in and edit the Wicked Witch for so long before I fall in love with this entire concept as well. I don't know.
Well, I think the truth is, maybe I did set that up on the tee, but the nation out there can go back and listen to every episode.
That's true.
Starting with number 1 and make their own decisions and conclusions about whether you guys have actually improved or not over the years. So,
please don't email back in with your feedback on that. Like, I listened to episode 3 of series 4. I really think there are some points
you're just as bad now as you were back then.
At least be consistent. That's a nice, consistency is not a terrible thing.
Hey, they had to go through all of those seasons just to discover that we remain that bad, so it's their own fault.
Jokes on that.
Joshua and Jason, any thoughts on what muscles you've developed over the years to carry forth with this podcast in a way that's compelling for people?
Well, I would definitely pick up that thread of the team and adding Jess to the team. And I'm sure the same is true for Joshua as for me. And we've talked about it on some previous episodes. When one of us steps in and does a solo interview, we can reflect the questions that we know the other one would ask.
Yeah.
And I think on one hand, that's a great thing, right? Gosh, look how long we've worked together. Look how we have an understanding of how we think about this industry. But it's also really wonderful to bring somebody else into that team in the form of Jess. And I don't have Jess's set of questions down pat yet. I don't know where her mind naturally goes. Clearly, we do talk about gatekeeping, even when we don't hit the record button. And so I know that's one subset that we talk about there. But there are so many interviews where I get to hear the questions Jess asks. And I think if it can be fresh for me as a co-host of this, then it has to be fresh for the listener and gives the listener something else. And once again, the proof is in the pudding. And when the listeners write in to say, hey, I loved that interview Jess did, and I loved the questions that Jess asked, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. This is working out. And the feedback is quite clear that Jess as another voice on this podcast is a good thing. I can see her blushing from 3,000 miles away. She's so humble. So that's my takeaway as we kind of, expand upon this team and have Jess as an additional voice is really powerful and really important.
Joshua, real quick. What did you learn over the years?
It's back to the team and what we all bring to it and the inquisitive nature that we all have. But it's the origin of that inquisitive nature, right? Like Jason, I think about you and your time with philosophy. Like you have to be inquisitive and you just, I've said this before, some of the interviews that you've had, like I would put them up against the Terry Grosses of the world or the Howard Sterns of the world because they're so on point and so incredibly present. So that I'll just highlight Jason there, but we all have that, right? We all have our own different ways in which we approach the conversation with whomever we're talking about. And I love that it's different. And I love that together, whether it's together or it's us interviewing people in a solo situation, we're always framing the conversation the way, like it, I don't know, Jess, if you know this particular podcast or this show, but a lot of our American listeners surely will. Car Talk on NPR. It was two brothers who know each other really well. They're tons of fun to listen to. They know everything about cars. They help people. People call in and say, I've got a problem with my car. What is it? And they answer the questions. I don't give a crap about cars. I don't know anything about cars. I know I turn them on and they get me to where I need to go. But it's not about the cars. It's about that conversation and just enjoying that, being the fly on the wall to that conversation.
Right.
And understanding those elements in a layman's term sort of delivery. And that's been, I think, our aim from the get-go. And the fact that all three of us can do it as a team or can do it, in a solo manner, it's great. I think we got the right team for it. We all bring something special to the pod.
Agreed wholeheartedly. Yeah, well said. Especially that bit that was really complimentary to Jason. That was especially well said.
Oh,
that really
I edited
resonated
that out.
With me.
Sorry, we started going over time, so I had to.
Is that the Easter
egg?
Now, I want to ask you all one more kind of philosophical question, then we'll get down to brass tacks about 2025 and what's to come. But, obviously the interviews are the central component of the podcast week in, week out. And I wanted to ask you about your approach to that, and how you identify who you'd like to talk to. And, the idea of guests, and where you can have that rapport that you've just been talking about having amongst yourselves, and then guests you don't know or are meeting for the first time. And, names versus, new names, right? People that everybody knows versus people that are, just meeting the nation for the first time. So, yeah, how do you go about approaching that? And is that intentional or is it more organic?
You want to take this one, Jason?
Sure. There's a number of parts to the answer, and so I'll try to keep it brief. So clearly there are people we're collaborating with when selecting single casks, and oftentimes the reason we're collaborating with them on single casks is because we know them, we know of them, we like what they're producing. We like to have that conversation with them. We want to taste their liquid and we want to tell people about their liquid. So the idea of spirit of collaboration is there's also a podcast component to this, and that's really fun to share. Then there's the people you meet along the way. Last year when we were over in Edinburgh, we've got Holyrood Distillery over there. We've got Port of Leith over there. Some instances we're meeting people for the first time, but thinking, holy shit, we are having such a cool experience. This is the type of thing we would love to convey to the listeners. And so maybe we'll make a return journey and we'll start talking to them and we'll go through the distillery. So there's that. Then there's the kind of the dream list that we put together, which is, who in this industry would we love to get on? Who seems outside of our friend circle, but we maybe know somebody who knows them and maybe they'd like to come on and talk to us. That would be really cool. And so we put out a few of those every season as well. And then, as Joshua was saying about a Matthew Rees or a Bonnie Prince Billy, we're then putting feelers out for who can we get who is maybe kind of a slightly tangential interview, but they are what you may call a celebrity or a big ticket name. And we put those lists together and we get as crazy as we possibly can. And we see where that may land. And then occasionally we get people, and this is the final point I'll make, is we occasionally have people who actually reach out to us and say, would there be room to come on and talk about what we're doing on the podcast? And if they're smart, they ask Padcost. That often gets them a yes. And then in terms of that interviewing, you then bring them on and you give them room to present themselves, and we leave the listener to draw the conclusion on, do I like what they're doing? Do I not? Do I have interest? Do I want to follow them? Do I not? That's nice to mix it up with that as well. So there's a number of different ways we end up with somebody on the podcast, and a number of different ways in which we may interview them. But that's kind of a broad access point for that.
Yeah, let me just to add on to that. Another thing that
leaves on branches.
Drink.
Hold on. Yep. Grab your drink. Grab your bingo card. Another thing that we like to do, especially back to the earlier comment of being two white guys in the industry, is to highlight, women, people of color, just people who have different life experiences, because it's valid. It adds to the whiskey industry, and these are voices that need to be heard
Absolutely.
and highlighted and respected. And so, we I think back to when we used to run Whiskey Jubilee, and the first event we had, it was all guys. The final event that we had, I would say, was probably closer to a 60-40 split of men to women, or 65-35. It grew, and, it used to be an all Jewish event because that was its origins. But then that grew to have, people from all walks of life. And so whether it's the podcast or festivals that we do, whatever it is, back to Jess's comment, there is no gatekeeping. We want to welcome people in, and we want to have those voices to go out. So that's a consideration for us year over year as well.
Yeah, spot on. And Jess has her list. That's all. I'm just leaving it there. And Jess has her list.
Project 2025 list, We're also not going to discuss the restraining orders all three of us have from repeatedly approaching whiskey people who do not want to talk to us for some weird reason on this podcast. We don't mention those people. I do have some people, and I'm a bit worried because some of the people that are on my list I admire a lot in this industry, and I'm worried that if I sit down and interview them, one, I'll embarrass myself by asking rubbish, repeatable questions, or two, I'll interview them and walk out being like, well, don't need to talk to them again then, ever.
Yeah, you don't want to meet your heroes, right? That's the problem.
That's a very real and slightly frightening aspect of working in the whiskey industry. There's a lot of people that I admire that my job allows me to get, oh God, this sounds really dodgy. It allows me to get closer access to them than perhaps a consumer or a punter would get. And that's definitely a privilege that I don't want to be seen to be abusing. But at the same time, I totally can call it and abuse it and turn it into a podcast. So then it's not even for personal gain. It's for sharing with the community at large. I don't know if you want to unleash this. It's a dangerous power.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Indeed.
So let's move on to what's in store for the nation in season 9 and what's to come. We can look back a little bit in the context of this at 2024. In previous podcasts, you have each kind of selected your favorite moment from One Nation Under the Whiskey in season 8. But what do you think worked? What do you think didn't work from a format standpoint, and how is that going to inform what's going to happen in season 9?
Yeah, well, let's talk about format first. We spent the first 8 years. Well, I shouldn't say that, right? I mean, I think year 1 we had shorter episodes, but as the podcast evolved, the time, the amount of time for each episode increased to where we got to an average of, say, 2 hours per episode, with our longest episode being 3 hours and 53 minutes. And that was our first Swiss Chalet episode. But this was happening in a time, this was happening during COVID, right? This was happening in a time where people couldn't go anywhere, and they didn't have, they had the time to be listening to incredibly long podcasts. And so I don't think that, while yes, they were long, I don't think that we filled any of it with fluff. But as people are getting out more, I think one of the changes to format that we're looking at is trying to shrink what we're offering people without taking podcast away from them, right? So right now we've got every other week we release an 1.5 to 2 hour episode. And we took away 2 years ago, Extra Extra, It's All About Whiskey. And for the past 2 years, everybody said, when's Extra Extra, It's All About Whiskey going to come back? So the format that we're looking to do is we want to shrink the maximum time of an episode down to an hour and bring some news back in. So what we're looking at doing moving forward with season 9 is, just like everybody will come to expect, there will be an interview episode every other week, but that will be about an hour. And then every opposing week, there will be a news episode. One week it'll be, say, news about the industry. And then the off week, it would be news about single cast nations. Those will bounce back and forth. Industry news, single cast nation news. Industry news, single cast nation news. And the weeks in between those will be our interview episodes. So if we do this right, interview episodes will be about an hour, and then the news episodes will be around a half hour, 35 minutes, somewhere around there. There may be occasions where we have a little less. There may be occasions where we have a touch more, or maybe we release audio that wasn't included in the interview. We're still figuring that portion of it out. But I think that's also an important point to push. We've created a new template, but now we have to feel it out and get comfortable with it. So the template is an interview every other Wednesday, and then every other opposing Wednesday will be industry news and then single cast nation news. So that's the detail from a formatting standpoint. Jason, did you want to touch on the approach or maybe thematic things?
Yeah, maybe not thematic, but certainly one of the things we've been talking about as season 8 has gone along was that we had remained in the pandemic mode of Zoom calls, and it was a straight up conversation, and that's what made it into the episode. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that was most exciting about the podcast when we started was being out and about, being in people's distilleries, bottling halls, being in people's cooperages. You know, I always make reference to our beloved Worm Tub episode that everybody talks about everywhere you go. Classic that we did. And so really the idea was to get back out again. However, we're three busy people. We're not always together. We're not always in the same spot at the same time. And so to free up the interview format to sometimes Joshua and I might be in the same place. Sometimes Jess and I might be in the same place. Sometimes Joshua and Jess might be in the same place. Sometimes we may be riding solo. Like there's going to be different ways in which we are engaging in these interviews with the subjects. Zoom calls will not go away entirely, right? We may speak with a producer in Australia and we can't just hop on a 23-hour flight to Australia. Just doesn't work that way.
I have repeatedly offered to do this for you. Like, let me be. I've always had this itch to be like the Dora the Explorer with a little backpack, bunch of microphones. I will get on a plane. I'll go to, and I just don't know why you refuse to take me up on this incredibly generous offer.
I will say, if someone's going to be country hopping in season 9, we know exactly who it is. Jessica Rabbit, Guillermo Lomas.
I like your idle threat that Zoom calls are not going to go away, because it's going to make our meetings extremely difficult if we get rid of them. Sending postcards back and forth between the 4 of us. It's going to be a very long-winded affair. It's going to be like a 3-week-long meeting.
I'm excited.
You're right. There's a place for both. Obviously, practicality. I love that technology actually relatively easy now to do exactly what the 4 of us are sat in our different time zones, different rooms, recording with equipment, and Josh is going to stitch it all together. I love that there is an ease of that, assuming that everybody is on board and okay and has okay internet connections and those technological issues that somehow underplay it. But I do think a lot of the whiskey industry and the drinks industry at large, I think the thing behind it is all about those personal connections, about meeting people. So you're right, putting microphones literally in front of people's faces allows you to enjoy that experience, even though the listener is washing up, driving the car, taking the kids to work, shouting as you once again discuss the colour of whiskey, and none of us can see it. Those kinds of things.
Only in Yorkshire are they taking the kids to work, Jess. Only in Yorkshire.
The kids take themselves to the mines all by themselves. They go down on their own.
They ride their pit pony to work while listening to our podcast.
Yes, on the way to the shin kicking competitions. I don't. The way you underplay my home county is criminal. And there's enough listeners of this podcast who will write in angrily to back me on this. So beware of messing with Yorkshire people. Mafia. You've been warned. Mafia.
So to wrap up this primer for season 9, I'm going to let you all look into your soul and decide how much you want to reveal about what's to come in season 9. So I'll simply ask each of you, what are you looking forward to for the podcast on season 9? And if you'd like to reveal and give some people a little taste of what's to come, you can do that. Who you're interested in talking to, who you're excited about visiting. If you'd like to keep that secret, then you can again wax poetic about what's to come over the next year or so. And we'll start with, we'll go in alphabetical order here with Jason, Jess, and then Joshua to wrap it up.
All right. I'm not going to name names. I'm going to say I am very excited to be stepping into some new distillery spaces and to be having fresh conversations while standing in front of someone, beside someone, really focusing on active engagement with the person I'm speaking with. And hell, drinking their whiskey, talking about their whiskey. People already know, long-time listeners already know, highlight for me was Barrel Boot Camp at VDC last year.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get out and do a bit more of that and see where I find myself on that. So very excited about that. We'll pass that on to the listener. Jessica.
Can I just say that Steve's made this final question I feel like I'm in an episode of The Traitors. Like, I feel like I have to be declaring that I am a faithful, definitely not a recruited traitor, nothing to see here, swear down, and all the other things that drive me wild about that show. I voted for yourself, Jason.
Thank you.
I have a couple of people I want to talk to. I'm not going to be cryptic and refuse to name them. I'm not going to name them because I'm scared that I'm not going to pull it off. So there's a couple of people that I want to talk to. I'm definitely going to take the listeners on my travels. I've got a pretty jam-packed month before I see these reprobates in person in March. So I'm excited to do a little bit of the aforementioned Dora the Exploring, taking you with me. Not sure how I'm going to make all of that work, but I will make it work. I don't have a specific interview that I think I'm looking forward to as hearing, because I think some of my favorite episodes that we have done, apart from the ones obviously where it's people that I wanted to hear us chatting to, have been surprising bits of information or bits about the industry that have been revealed that I wasn't anticipating going into. So for the example that we've used a couple of times in this episode is the Spirit of Yorkshire interview. I didn't realize with David we were going to get so down and dirty with the agriculture. And I came out of listening to that interview being like, wow, now I have a bunch of other questions that when I get to go interact or visit smaller distilleries who are maybe farm distilleries, I have some more informed questions I can bring to talking to those people, obviously in a hope to make me look really intelligent. So I think that's I don't have I'm just going to waffle vaguely, and then I'm going to let Joshua do an incomplete Joshua Hatton list of exciting things to come in 2025. Over to you.
Beautifully set up.
I'm only going to mention 3 things. Here are the things that I'm excited about. Thing number 1, I'm really excited to be getting out on the road and being in front of people. And that may include distillery visits. It may include some live podcasts. That may include a little J&J, Joshua and Jason, road trip here in the States, which is something that we've been playing with. And, Jess, I'm going to get to travel with you. So you and I will have some time together in Scotland talking to some people I'm really excited about. So I guess the only thing that I would add on top of those 2 things is we're in discussions with a couple of celebrity folks, and things are looking good, but you never know, right? You never know. It may not happen.
They're skittish. You may look them square in the eye and they run back into the woods.
Are you sure you mean celebrities and not cats? Similar descriptions.
My bad.
Squirrels.
Yeah, you have to offer them your hand palm down so they can sniff it first. And
there are celebrities on Joshua's roof right now, but the trouble is he's cut the branches to his tree. You might be reading about celebrity deaths in 2025.
Throwing them into
Connecticut.
This is why my name today is Joshua Squirrelgate Hatton. The squirrels have made it back onto my roof. They're all over the place. I've watched them harvest sticks and bring them up to my roof. So I've got to trim my tree again.
Those sticks are for stabbing you. Be careful.
Yeah, they listened to the podcast. They heard your plans and they have grouped and formed a resistance.
I really think season 9 is going to be a lot of fun because we're setting out to do what we'd set out early on, which is to be out in front of people. And I think back to my favorite episode from last year, which was visiting Ardna Merkin, and the number of people who've reached out and said, it was amazing. I felt as if I was at the Ardna Merkin distillery. And we were there for 2.5 hours or so going through that. I think the episode ended up being an hour and 45, but there was so much great audio footage there for me to piece together an experience that me as a punter would love to hear, to be, that fly on the wall. So I'm looking forward to bringing more of that to the listener, because it's clear the listeners are digging it.
Without doubt.
Well, I've had the privilege of being on the podcast a number of times, and Jason's always one to point out, hey, you don't need to listen to that. You were on it. But inevitably, I listen to it anyway, right? Because, because I want to relive that experience, but also because listening to it in its entirety and hearing again that camaraderie that you all are talking about and being a part of that is absolutely worth going back to. So I'm going to do that with this episode as well. I'm looking forward to listening to it in a couple weeks. And I want to thank you all for, letting us behind the microphone, as it were, and seeing how the sausage is made for One Nation Under Whiskey podcast.
Pack it tight.
So,
we pack it real tight, Steve.
We pack it real tight. Except for this one, just for the record, Jason, I've officially gone over 45 minutes.
Yeah,
so,
it's now a tight 35.
It's now a tight. Yeah.
It's gone so long, it's become a tight 35.
But thank you. Looking forward to hearing this, and looking forward to season 9 as well.
Before you send us on our way, Steve, you were a fantastic host. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for teeing us up. Thank you for your good company in this episode. And I absolutely cheers to season 9. This is going to be a good one. I know Joshua made a great point there about the template. Filling in this template, establishing this template. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm really excited.
Yeah.
Me too.
Same.
Well, cheers to you guys, and cheers to the nation.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Joshua's horrible clanky glasses strike again.
Yeah.